Record. All right.
Yeah.
So you've probably seen the questions, and
I have. And what I've done, Liv, is I wrote some answers. I've written the answers for myself, and Nana Sue has just posted them to you, my notes.
okay.
So pretty well going to say, pretty well what I've said is on my notes. So there might be a little bit extra in the notes because I'll try and keep it as short as I possibly can, you know.
Okay.
Okay.
So the first question is, what did it feel like living through the war?
Well, it was very scary at first because I was only just 3 weeks short of my 10th birthday. My mum and dad were worried that dad would have to go into the army and the navy or the air force. All the dads around us that lived around us, they were all being called up. The younger men, the ladies, the mums were joining the land army. That's the going onto the land, helping the farmers and digging and that sort of thing. It was very difficult for us because the mum also, my mum didn't, because we had a shop, we had a grocer's shop when I was a little boy. At that age we had a grocer's shop. I'll tell you about that afterwards. Went to school. Had to walk a long way to school. I had to catch a bus and a train and then another bus to get to school. And that was difficult because sometimes they were late because petrol was rationed. Right from the start, it was very difficult. And then of course came the siren. Oh, I was going to say, we had the trains. There was no coal. Coal was rationed, so and there were steam trains, of course. There was no lighting. The street lights were switched off. We had the blackout. All the houses people had to buy a black material or paint the windows black or the doors, the windows, the shutters black. There was no petrol. Red petrol came in, and the only people who could have red petrol were the businesses. So it was very scary. But initially. It took until about 6 months before the war was going. 6 months before the Germans then decided they were going to bomb us. It was clothing was rationed. I remember that my school uniform had to be bought on clothing coupons. Everybody had so many clothing coupons. And then of course there was a rationing. It came in right away. Butter, sugar, flour, margarine, cheese, bacon, eggs. All those were rationed. Each person, they got a ration book and you had to rip a little coupon out and give it to the shopkeeper. But the most important thing about that I remember was that each shop had to have registered customers. The customers signed on with the shopkeeper and they had to go to that shopkeeper alone. They couldn't go to any shop and buy butter or sugar. They had to go to that one shop. It was awful. The police were out in steel helmets ready for the bombing, and the sirens kept coming. We used to have siren practices, and everybody was frightened of showing a chink of light from the house because the police were looking for any little bits of light that would come out of the window. So it was very scary, really, because we didn't know what was going to happen, where all the dads were going to when they joined the army and the navy and the air force. They just disappeared. So there were very few men around, young men, all the old men, of course. But then people had to become fire watchers. My dad became what they call an air raid precaution man, and they were useful afterwards because when the bombs dropped on the houses, my dad used to dig out my dad and other people, of course. So it was very scary.
Okay, so the next question is, did you ever have to take cover because of bombings or invasions?
Well, we had to, once the bombing started in May 1940, that's about 6 months, the bombing didn't start immediately, but all the practicing and going, we had to take cover in the air raid shelters which were being built.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was digging great big holes in the garden and putting wooden boards on top and concrete and corrugated iron.
Mm-hmm.
So we had practices. The sirens went off, and you had to get to a air raid shelter very quickly. Uh, we did get notices then in the summer. We got notices of the German planes were coming over the channel, over the English Channel, across from France and Germany. And we got telephone calls from England to the north of England saying the planes have crossed over. We don't know where they're going. They're going to Liverpool or Manchester or Sheffield or one of the big cities. We don't know where they're going quite, but they're on their way. So I remember one instance. You asked me about going in a shelter. I remember going in May 1940. That's why I remember the thing. I was on holiday from school for the Whitsuntide holiday, and I rode my bike about 20 miles to my grandmother's in St Helens, which is a town just outside Liverpool. You've been to St Helens? You've been in Sutton? You remember we went to a graveyard, didn't we, looking for a grave? One of my uncle's graves. Well, we what was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say that I went to stay with my grandmother, my grandma, on my own, because I was only 10, and my grandmother lived all alone in a small house. So one night, whilst I was there, the sirens went, and my grandmother was frightened. She'd put a small table under the stairs. As she went upstairs, she had a cupboard, and we got in. My grandma and I got into the cupboard and you could hear the planes going over and the bombs dropping on Liverpool that night. I'll always remember that. They lit up the skyline all around with the fires all over Liverpool. That night in Liverpool docks, actually, there was a ship. I've forgotten its name. I think it was called some Malachind or something like that. I haven't checked it, but a direct bomb hit this ship, which was full of explosives ready to get out, and it blew up, and a lot of people were killed, and houses demolished all around the docks in Liverpool. So that's really the only time I was ever scared and had to hide. I went into the air raid shelters, but we didn't know what was happening. It's
Okay, so next is, we kind of talked about this a bit earlier, but were some foods quite hard to find because of rationing?
Yes, that's right. Well, there was not things hard to find; they just weren't there. Your family, you had a ration book, of course, and if you wanted butter, you couldn't just buy a pack of butter like you can do it now in the supermarket. You go and put a pack of butter in your supermarket trolley. But in those days, you got a pack of butter which had to last you a week, maybe, and of course I had my sister as well, so there were four of us, and they used to cut off maybe half of a pack of butter, and that had to last you for the week. You couldn't do anything about that. So rationing was very difficult. But of course, we had a shop which gave us a little bit of an advantage because we had the stuff delivered to us. For instance, there was chocolate biscuits. Now you couldn't get a chocolate biscuit. There's no sweets or chocolate, but if you got a chocolate, I remember my mother hiding a tin of chocolate wafer biscuits under the bed in a tin, and I used to pinch them. Oh dear, it's a long time ago. Uh, the rationing was dreadful. Mainly the sweets and chocolate. You couldn't really buy anything that had sugar. We did have potatoes, of course, and onions and leeks and all that sort of thing. Right through the war, we were able to get, and right through the war, we were able to get damsons and plums and no oranges. I never saw an orange all the war, and neither did I see a banana. I was about 15 before I saw a banana. Um, we had lots of fruit, apples in England, apples, plums, pears, that sort of thing. But there was no importing. We didn't get anything, bananas, oranges. Never saw a banana all the war. So for 5 years, didn't see one.
Mm.
Uh, bread, yes, we had plenty of bread. Bread and potatoes, they were favourites. We had corned beef hash regularly, that sort of thing. I can remember that. All the time, the bombs were dropping and houses were being demolished. Not where I lived too much. I remember a bomb dropping on a row of houses in Tottington, a little village from where I lived, and it demolished the whole row of about 10 houses, and lots of people were killed. About 70 people were killed that night, and that was about 2 miles across the fields from where I lived. So we missed that. But that apparently was a stray. They held it to be a stray bomb, which the German bomber had dropped. He'd not dropped it in Liverpool. He decided he was going to get back to Germany, and he dropped the bomb just to take the weight off the airplane. So he just dropped the bomb, and he certainly didn't drop it on Liverpool. So Tottington suffered for that.
Mm.
Yeah. You're saying about that's only taking cover. It was all air raid shelter. We had an air raid shelter in the schoolyard, a great big one, about 60 or 70 kids all diving into it was sort of a mound of earth dug in the ground, and the kids we all ran into that during the course of. But if the sirens went, the bombers didn't always come over, and the bombs didn't always land, but it was certainly very scary. Yeah.
So, yeah. Next is, did you ever have to get separated from your parents or your sister?
Not from my sister too much. We were similar. My sister was 4 years younger than me. She was at the primary school at the time. But we were separated from my dad because while my dad was not called up, he was a joiner by trade, carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst he was then 30 odd and he was past the being called up age at that moment, the urgent call, men were called up between sort of 19 and 30. My dad was then about 32 or 33, so he missed the actual call up into the army. But he was then about 1941. He was called. He was sent to work, and he was sent to Scotland and to Carlisle in England and to other places. Penrith, I remember him going to, and he was building when the Italian army gave up in 1942, and all Italian prisoners were brought to England, and we had to build wooden huts for them all over England, and my dad went away building wooden huts just to look after the Italian prisoners. Mm-hmm. So, but that's the only time we were separated. But of course we were. My dad was away for sort of 3 years. He came home. He was able to drive home. He had to get this special red petrol, and because he was on his own, he could drive away and come home, and he'd come home maybe for the weekend or maybe for the odd day, but generally. So my mum looked after us all the time, although my grandma lived not far away and she used to come and help out at the shop, so it was very difficult. It was, but we were separated. That's the only separation really. We, of course, talking about separation, where I lived was in the countryside more than the city. The inner city kids from Liverpool and Manchester and London particularly were evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
Those cities they evacuated, and some evacuees children came to live by us. I remember two children. The Clark family had two came from Bradford, and then they never went back to Bradford. They lived with their auntie where I lived, and they never went back. They stayed and they went off to school and university. Helen Clark, one of the girls, she went off to university. So, there was no separations as such, but the evacuations were, a lot of families did suffer because of the evacuations. Kids like yourself, your age, with a gas mask. Had a gas mask in a cardboard box. You had to carry a gas mask all the time and get used to wearing it. In fact, there used to be gas mask drills at school. We had the bell went and we all had to go in the schoolyard and put our gas masks on so that we could do it. But as far as separation is concerned, I didn't have that much separation.
Yeah. So the next is, what was the deal with propaganda there?
Propaganda. Well, if you remember the other day when we were talking, we talked about propaganda, didn't we? And I remember there was lots of propaganda. We had the Germans gave us lots of propaganda. I did mention to you William Joyce, who was known as Lord Haw Haw. He used to tell that Germany were winning the war and England many men were being killed, many Englishmen were being killed in Germany and in France, and that we were in a bad way. And we had propaganda. There's one I remember which I mentioned the other day, was careless talk costs lives. Yeah, that's meaning that you shouldn't talk. You shouldn't be sitting on the bus and telling your mate that your uncle had had sent you a letter from Germany or from some. You couldn't. You weren't allowed to do that. That was against the law. Don't waste food was a big poster that was up all the time. Don't waste food, save everything. And then dig for victory. And most of the ladies, most of the gardens were dug over, and there was potatoes, all the veggies. Like you've had a little allotment, haven't you? Potatoes and tomatoes, and so there was a lot of propaganda, a lot of things said that weren't true, but certainly coming back to us from Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do you have any good memories of wartime?
I have some. I joined the Church Lads Brigade. You probably don't have that in America. It's a sort of a like the Boy Scouts. It's a similar organisation to each church in the country pretty well had a church. So we had little, and I was a choir boy, which I was happy to do. My dad and my uncle were in the choir at St Philip's Church locally. I was happy just to be let out, avoiding the sirens, playing cricket and football in the fields around the house. That was good. I enjoyed that. I made a note here that I used to help the milkman. The milkman delivered milk by horse and cart, and he had milk churns and a ladle, and people came along with jugs, and the milk was poured into the jug, and yeah, it was that was good. I was quite happy about that. But one of the happiest things I remember about it, when America joined, which will interest you, when Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941, December 1940, Pearl Harbor was bombed in Honolulu, of course, and the Americans joined in the war. And then many American soldiers came to Britain, and they were all over England, and particularly so. American soldiers were very popular because they were handing silk stockings to the ladies, chewing gum for the kids, and which we didn't have. And I remember Camel cigarettes. They always had loads of cigarettes, the Americans. So the American soldiers were happy, and two of them actually. And I remember two American soldiers called Chick and Dale. I don't know the surnames now. I probably did know them once, but I don't remember. But Chickendale used to come regularly to my auntie in Lytham. In Lytham St Anne's, where you've been, I think you've been to Lytham at some stage. And she lived there, and she welcomed and used to come in and have a meal with her and join and go to the cinema with her, and because she was my uncle then was a policeman in Lytham, so they were happy to look after the American soldiers. You know, it was great. I was very happy about that. What else? The happiest time, of course, was May 1945 when the war ended, and then we all celebrated. And you know, they were happy times. But generally speaking, I suppose if I wasn't, I was not too unhappy really any time. No, not really.
Did any of your close friends or family get drafted into the war?
Well, my close friends, my relatives, I had uncles, I had many uncles, but all of them were miners, coal miners. 7 or 8. I had 13. My mother had 13. And she had 12 brothers and a sister. And she was one of 14 then. And about 9 or 10 of the men were miners. So they were exempt. Because of going down the mines, they were exempt from going into the army. But I had an Uncle Dan, which was nearest my mother's age. My Uncle Dan he was in the army. I know he was in Africa at some stage because I remember him. I received a little cardboard box with a banana in. Arrived at my house. It's a bit black was the banana, but it sent it all the way from Africa. And I don't know what happened to him. We never knew. We tried to find him after the war, but we don't know. He may have been killed. We just don't know. We're never able to find out about that. But I remember that's really good memories, and that's about it. And with that question, I can't really expand on that anymore.
So, did you have to help with anything in the war?
Not as a child, but I was your age, of course, during the war. I was like you, growing up from 11, 12, 13 until I was 15. The war went on. I was almost 15. I wasn't quite 15 when the war ended, but I had to help my mother out. Of course, I learned to drive when I was about 15, and my mother never driven. There was a friend of ours who was a baker in the local town, and he used to come and help my mother and go to the wholesale fruit and market, the fruit and fish market. By the way, we could get fish. There was plenty of fish available, you know, at that time, plaice and cod and that sort of thing. And I know that this chap used to help my mother and take her to the market to buy from the wholesalers for the. So I did help. I went with them and I used to load the trailer and that. So I was useful as a help. But I had homework help. I had a homework help from 2 friends. One was the local chairman of the council who was the managing director of a chemical company. So I had help with my chemistry and my math. And I also had help from a man who was a sanitary inspector, which you'll look up and find out what that was. And he was chairman of the local milk marketing board, so he was quite a clever man, and he used to help me with my math and my English. So I did have help as a kid, you know. But generally, I was quite smart. Really, I wasn't. I didn't need a lot of. Yeah. Now, going back to the explosion, I'm just talking about. Your dad may look up for you. You can look up yourself. That one of Hitler's relatives, I think it was a brother or a half brother, was killed in that air raid when that that explosion occurred in, I haven't looked, I should have looked it up really, but you can look it up anyway. When that explosion occurred in Liverpool docks that night in May 1940, I think it was then, one of Hitler's brothers, half brothers or cousins, was killed. He lived in Liverpool and he was killed. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened about that. I don't remember much about that. So I did have a little bit of help. It certainly helped with my schoolwork, but not much help really. We just had to get on with it. Live. We were there, but later on, when I got to 14, 15, of course, the bombing had stopped, and because the war was taking place then in Germany and Italy, and the African War had finished. All the American troops and the English troops had driven the Germans back into Germany. So the fighting was taking place then around Belgium and Holland, and they were driving the Germans back into Germany, really. So that's about it. There was another question you were going to ask me, wasn't there?
I think that might be it.
Okay, well, that's fine. Yeah.
So, is that all? Like, do you want to add anything?
No, not really, Liv. I think you'll have me notes and that. There's many smaller stories that go on forever. you know, and, that's pretty well it. It was. I think I've told you how I was. I did very well at school. I got good results at school. I was when I coming up later after the war ended. I was at school. I went into the sixth form, and then I was due for a call up myself. By the time I was 17, I had a medical to go into the forces. It was national service. You had to go. I had a medical, and I finished up in the RAF in 1948. So that was my war. It was. I wasn't old enough to fight, but I was old enough to run about and do the errands. I ran a lot of errands, and it wasn't a too unhappy time, I've got to say. A lot of people had it worse than I do, particularly the inner city people, the kids in the inner cities. They were really struggling because the bombs were falling all around them, but I never really saw. So I went to see that Tottington air raid when a couple of days later I went across there to see the bombs had dropped. I don't think I can add much to what I've said really. A lot. I mean, I remember it quite well. It's vivid. A lot of those things are vivid. Particularly, I remember during the war going into the farmer's field, and we took a lawnmower with us, and we mowed the grass in the farmer's field where the cows were, so that we could make a cricket pitch. So football and cricket. Yes, I played it. So I think it's where it is. I don't know that I could add anything else to what I said. Really, it's you can pick the bones out of what what I've said. I hope I've been useful to you. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
That's okay. I'm very proud to have talked to you about it. I am. I'm glad you've asked me. It's great. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll speak to your dad now and.